If you own a Nintendo Switch, or just picked up a Switch 2, this one's for you. We're counting down 20 open-world games you absolutely have to play on these consoles, from hidden gems to absolute legends. Let's get into it. Trails in the Sky First Chapter is a full, ground-up remake of the classic JRPG that started the beloved Trails series. You play as Estelle Bright and her adoptive brother Joshua, two junior bracers, basically licensed monster hunters and peacekeepers, setting out across the Liberal Kingdom to rank up and prove themselves. What starts as a simple training journey slowly turns into a full-blown conspiracy that threatens the entire kingdom. The world reacts to your progress in a genuinely impressive way. Every NPC has updated dialogue depending on where you are in the story, which makes the world feel alive. Combat gives you two options, classic turn-based or real-time action, so you can pick your style. The turn-based system uses a slotting mechanic called quartz to build your abilities, which adds real depth without being overwhelming. On Switch 2, you're looking at up to 4K at 30 frames per second, or 1080p at 60 frames per second docked, with noticeably reduced load times.
We're almost there. An exam, huh?
Come on, it's too late to back out now.
Red Dead Redemption is the story of John Marston, a former outlaw forced by the government to hunt down his old gang members in exchange for his family's freedom. The open world feels genuinely alive, with random encounters, wildlife, and a day-night cycle that actually matters. You ride across deserts, mountains, and swamps, doing bounty hunting, dueling, and getting into all sorts of trouble. The shooting mechanics are third-person with a slow-motion, dead-eye targeting system that makes gunfights feel cinematic. The original Switch version ran at 30 frames per second at 1080p docked, totally playable, but the Switch 2 version is the one you want. Using DLSS upscaling, it runs at a mostly locked 60 frames per second with a 1440p docked image, a massive upgrade. In handheld mode, DLSS reconstructs a 1080p image from 540p. Even minor pop-in issues from the original are cleaned up. This is one of Rockstar's best games, and it plays beautifully on Switch 2. Square Enix remade two of the most important RPGs ever made and gave them the HD 2D treatment, that gorgeous style from Octopath Traveler that layers pixel art characters over stunning 3D lighting effects. Dragon Quest I follows a lone hero, a descendant of the legendary warrior Erdrick, tasked with defeating the Dragon Lord and recovering the stolen Ball of Light. It's short, direct, and surprisingly charming. Dragon Quest II expands everything. You now travel with a party, explore a much bigger world, and face a darker, more dangerous threat. Both games are classic turn-based JRPGs. You wander an overworld, fight random battles, gain experience, and level up your stats and spells. On Switch, the games run at 30 frames per second, totally fine for this style of game. On Switch 2, it's a smooth 60 frames per second throughout, with dynamic 1440 by 810 docked and much snappier load times. Dynamic torch lighting in dungeons and real-time water reflections are noticeably better on Switch 2. The Witcher 3 is one of the greatest open-world RPGs ever made. You play as Geralt of Rivia, a professional monster hunter for hire who gets caught up in a massive, war-torn world while searching for someone he deeply cares about. The world is enormous, two massive open regions packed with cities, villages, swamps, mountains, and hundreds of side quests that feel like full stories in themselves. Combat is real-time with swords and magic signs, and it rewards preparation, reading enemy weaknesses, crafting potions, and setting traps. The complete edition on Switch includes all DLC, making it one of the best value packages on the platform. On original Switch, it ran between 20 to 30 frames per second, which was rough in demanding areas. On Switch 2, it holds a stable 30 frames per second throughout, thanks to improved backward compatibility. And because of how the dynamic resolution scaling works, the image quality is noticeably sharper too. The hardware's extra power keeps the resolution from dropping as much.
Slow now. Whoa. Hey-ya!
Pokémon Scarlet and Violet marked the first time the main series went fully open world. No linear routes, no forced order. You get 3 distinct storylines to tackle however you want: hunting Titan Pokémon, taking on Team Starbases, or working through gyms, all across the Paldea region. You explore on the back of your legendary Pokémon, who can sprint, climb, glide, and swim, giving exploration a real sense of freedom. The core gameplay is the familiar catch, train, and battle loop, but the open-world pacing lets you customize your journey completely. The story has some genuinely emotional moments that catch you off guard. At launch, the game ran terribly on Switch. 1. Frame rates regularly dipping to 20 frames per second or lower in busy areas. Pop-in everywhere. A free Switch 2 update changed everything. The game now runs at 60 frames per second with DLSS upscaling, docked at 4K on compatible TVs, and around 648p dynamically in handheld, reconstructed up to 1080p. Pokémon Legends Arceus. Set in the ancient Hisui region, a feudal-era version of what will become Sinnoh, you're a researcher tasked with completing the first Pokédex ever made. Catching Pokémon here isn't about battling every single one. You sneak through tall grass, throw Pokéballs directly from the field, observe behaviors, and gather research data to fill your entries. Battles still exist, but they feel faster and more dynamic, with an action turn system that lets you choose between strong, slower moves or agile, faster ones. The world is divided into large, open zones full of Pokémon going about their day, from gentle herbivores to aggressive apex predators that will chase you down. On Switch 2, it plays noticeably smoother with tighter frame pacing and faster load times. It's one of the most different Pokémon games ever made, and it works really well for anyone who wanted the series to try something bold. Xenoblade Chronicles is a landmark JRPG set on the bodies of 2 enormous frozen titans, creatures so massive that entire civilizations have built their worlds on them. You play as Shulk, a young man whose village is attacked by mechanical enemies called the Mechon, setting him on a journey for answers and revenge across one of the most visually distinct open worlds you'll ever see. The real-time combat system lets you move freely around enemies while your party auto-attacks, and you manually activate special moves called arts using a cooldown system. The story is genuinely ambitious and builds to a conclusion that earns every hour of the journey. The definitive edition adds a story epilogue and improved visuals over the original. On Switch, it targets 30 frames per second and is generally stable. On Switch 2, via backward compatibility, performance is improved, though a dedicated patch would push it further. It still looks and runs well enough to be one of the best RPG experiences on the platform. Hogwarts Legacy puts you in the shoes of a fifth-year student at Hogwarts in the 1800s, long before Harry Potter's time, so the story is entirely original. The open world covers the entire wizarding landscape, Hogwarts Castle itself, Hogsmeade Village, and a huge Scottish countryside full of magical beasts, dungeons, and hidden challenges. Combat is built around casting spells. You build combos, juggle enemies with levitation, reveal weaknesses, and chain effects in satisfying ways. You can also learn unforgivable curses if you choose. On Switch 2, it runs using DLSS with a 720p base image reconstructed to roughly 1080p docked, targeting 30 frames per second stable and clean. Handheld is 540p upscaled to around 1080p. Lighting, anti-aliasing, and colors are all noticeably improved over Switch 1. It's one of the most impressive visual showcases for what Switch 2 can do with a demanding Unreal Engine game.
So how did you manage to get on the librarian's bad side?
Well, I suspect it's a matter of differing opinions. She thinks I shouldn't be allowed in the
NieR Automata. You control 2B, an android warrior deployed to reclaim a post-apocalyptic Earth from machines that have driven humanity to the moon. The combat is fast, stylish, and layered. You slash with swords, shoot with bullets, and customize your loadout through chip implants that change your stats and abilities. It encourages you to play through multiple times from different perspectives, slowly peeling back layers of the story that completely change your understanding of everything you've seen. It asks real questions about consciousness, purpose, and what makes life meaningful, and it does so without being preachy. On Switch 1, it ran at 30 frames per second and was technically playable, though with some performance hiccups. On Switch 2, via backward compatibility, it runs at 30 frames per second with improved stability. Note, there have been compatibility issues reported, so playing on original Switch hardware or waiting for a proper patch is worth keeping in mind. The Complete Edition includes all DLC. Dragon Quest XI-S. You play as the Luminary, a young man who discovers on his coming-of-age day that he is the reincarnation of a legendary hero, and is immediately branded as a harbinger of darkness by the king. What follows is an epic journey across a gorgeous world to uncover the truth and stand against an ancient evil. The turn-based combat is deep without being punishing. You manage a colorful party of characters, each with unique skill trees you customize through a sphere grid. The world is full of towns, dungeons, and secrets, and the side content is genuinely interesting. The S version adds orchestrated music, 2D retro mode letting you play classic 16-bit style, and quality of life improvements. On Switch 1 and Switch 2 via backward compatibility, it runs at 30 frames per second. Frame pacing can be inconsistent on Switch 2 without a native patch. A proper Switch 2 upgrade would make a real difference here. Xenoblade Chronicles X is the most ambitious open-world game Monolith Soft has ever made. In 2054, Earth is destroyed, and the survivors crash land on a mysterious alien planet called NieR. You join a paramilitary organization to explore this enormous alien landscape and figure out how to survive. The 5 zones of NieR are each the size of a full game world on their own, filled with towering creatures, alien ecosystems, and secrets that reward exploration. Combat is real-time with arts and a unique TP system. And mid-game, you unlock massive mech suits called Skells that let you fly, sprint at insane speeds, and fight enormous monsters. The Definitive Edition on Switch added a new story chapter, rebalancing, and the new companion app. On Switch 2, the upgrade pack brings up to 4K at 60 frames per second in TV mode, and up to 1080p at 60 frames per second in handheld, a dramatic improvement over the original 30 frames per second Switch version. Dragon's Dogma: Dark Arisen is a dark fantasy action RPG with a premise that hooks you immediately. A dragon tears out your heart, and instead of dying, you become an Arisen, a chosen warrior with a burning mark on your chest, destined to hunt down the dragon that took something from you. Combat is the real highlight here. It's third-person, real-time action, where you can physically climb on top of large enemies, grab a Cyclops by the face, hang off a griffin's wing, scale a golem to strike its glowing weak points. You pick a vocation: fighter, mage, strider, mystic knight, and more, each playing completely differently with their own skill trees. The Dark Arisen version adds a full underground dungeon area called Bitter Black Isle, packed with tough challenges and high-level gear. On Switch, it targets 30 frames per second and runs stably for most of the game. On Switch 2 via backward compatibility, the performance is noticeably smoother and load times are faster.
A Riftstone. A strange power emanates from within.
Mario Kart World is Nintendo's most ambitious kart racer yet, and one of the biggest launch titles for Switch 2. The entire world is now a connected, seamless map. Courses are no longer separate, isolated tracks, but interconnected sections of one giant world you can explore in free roam mode between races. You drive, glide, and even swim through environments inspired by real-world regions, discovering shortcuts, collectibles, and surprises. The racing itself builds on Mario Kart 8 Deluxe with new mechanics, smarter item play, and the ability to hang off the side of your cart for special moves. Free roam lets you explore at your own pace, turning the world into a playground. The roster is the biggest in series history. On Switch 2, it runs at 1440p docked and targets 60 frames per second in standard play, with a 120 frames per second mode available on compatible TVs for an ultra-smooth experience. Handheld performance is equally sharp. Cyberpunk 2077. You play as V, a mercenary in Night City, a neon-soaked, hyper-corporate megalopolis where power, violence, and style are currency. After a job goes wrong, you end up sharing your mind with the digital ghost of a legendary rock star, and the clock starts ticking as this presence slowly overwrites your identity. The open world is one of the densest ever made, 6 distinct districts, each with their own culture, crime, and contracts. The gameplay blends first-person gunplay, hacking, stealth, and melee combat that you can mix and match through deep character builds. The main story is tightly written, and the Phantom Liberty DLC adds a spy thriller side story that's arguably the best content in the game. On Switch 2, there are 2 modes. Quality mode at 30 frames per second targets 1080p docked with DLSS, and Performance mode targets 40 frames per second with a flexible 540p to 1080p range using DLSS. Handheld ranges from 360p to 720p reconstructed to 720p in Performance mode. The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim remains one of the most impressive open-world RPGs available on Nintendo hardware because of how well it adapts such a massive fantasy adventure into a portable experience. On the original Nintendo Switch, the game runs at 900p while docked and dynamic 720p in handheld mode with a stable 30 FPS target, delivering a smooth experience whether exploring snowy mountains, fighting dragons, or clearing dungeons. Even years later, it still feels natural on a handheld system, thanks to quick gameplay loops and the freedom to play anywhere. On Nintendo Switch 2, Skyrim receives a noticeable upgrade, with sharper visuals, faster loading times, improved image quality through DLSS, and a new performance mode targeting 60 FPS. The enhanced version can reach much higher resolutions than the original Switch, while offering smoother combat and exploration, making Skyrim feel more responsive and immersive than ever on a Nintendo console. Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake is a masterpiece of a remake. The original 1988 game is the prequel to Dragon Quest I and II. You're following in your legendary father Ortega's footsteps to become a hero and defeat the archfiend Baramos. You build your own party from scratch at a tavern, choosing classes and personalities for each member, and can change vocations as you progress. The class system is deep. Characters who master one class carry stat bonuses into the next, encouraging experimentation. The world is enormous for a classic RPG, and the HD 2D treatment makes it gorgeous. Pixel art sprites over real-time 3D lighting, particle effects, and weather. The story has a final act that completely reframes the entire adventure in a genuinely moving way. On Switch 1, it runs at 30 frames per second, with some performance drops in busier areas. On Switch 2, those drops are eliminated with a stable 60 frames per second and significantly improved visual clarity. Tears of the Kingdom takes Breath of the Wild's Hyrule and pushes it to a completely different level. Ancient ruins have risen into the sky, mysterious underground caverns now stretch beneath the surface, and the surface itself has been transformed by a mysterious ancient phenomenon. Link has new abilities. Ultra Hand lets you grab and fuse objects together to build vehicles, weapons, and contraptions. Ascend lets you pass through ceilings, and Recall rewinds the movement of objects in time. These systems interact in ways that make solving puzzles and navigating the world feel incredibly open. There's almost always more than one valid solution. On Switch 1, it ran at 30 frames per second with notable drops in complex physics scenarios. The Switch 2 edition upgrades it to 4K docked with a peak of 1440p, dynamic resolution, and a rock-solid 60 frames per second, including during complex Ultra Hand contraptions. Handheld goes up to 1080p. Kingdom Come Deliverance is unlike anything else on this list. There's no fantasy, no magic, no chosen hero with a destiny. You play as Henry, the son of a blacksmith, in 15th century Bohemia. Your village is attacked, your parents are killed, and you find yourself trying to survive and make sense of the real historical conflict happening around you. Everything is grounded in reality. Combat requires stamina management and real technique. Conversations check your charisma and speechcraft, and sneaking requires patience. You can get drunk, get sick from bad food, or fail quests simply because Henry isn't skilled enough yet. The open world is a beautifully recreated medieval landscape with genuine day-night routines for every NPC. On original Switch, it targeted 30 frames per second, with dynamic resolution dropping to 540p in demanding areas. Playable, but rough. On Switch 2 via backward compatibility, it runs at a locked 30 frames per second, with significantly better and more consistent image quality. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 brings together the thematic threads of the entire series and delivers one of the most emotionally rich JRPG stories ever told. In a world where two nations are locked in endless war, soldiers from both sides only live for 10 years before their life energy is consumed. 6 soldiers, 3 from each nation, are thrown together under extraordinary circumstances and forced to confront the world that created them. The combat system is the most refined in the series. Large parties with interchangeable classes, an Ouroboros fusion system that merges 2 characters into a powerful form, and chain attacks that can flip entire battles. The open world is full of natural beauty, plains, forests, ruins, with incredible scale that rewards exploration. The story tackles themes of mortality, purpose, and freedom in ways that land emotionally without ever feeling heavy-handed. Breath of the Wild. You wake up as Link with no memory, in a ruined Hyrule where Calamity Ganon has been lurking for 100 years. From the moment you leave the starting plateau, the entire world is open to you. No mandatory order, no hand-holding. Climb almost any surface, glide across valleys, cook food for buffs, and solve 120 shrines scattered across the landscape. Physics govern everything. Fire spreads, metal conducts electricity, wind carries paragliders. Enemies adapt to your gear and tactics. The world is dense with secrets that feel genuinely discovered rather than collected. It's a game about exploration as a feeling rather than a checklist. On Switch, it ran at a mostly stable 30 frames per second, with drops in demanding areas like Korok Forest. The Switch 2 edition upgrades it to a locked 60 frames per second, 1440p peak docked with improved dynamic resolution, higher quality textures, improved shadows, and load times cut nearly in half. Handheld goes up to 1080p. "20 open-world games worth your time on Switch and Switch 2. Whether you're into JRPGs, action games, survival, or pure exploration, there's something on here for everyone. Drop a comment with your favorite from the list or one I missed. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one.